Anxiety over the weakening rand is rife this afternoon. The rand fell a further 1% to 14 rand 14 cents to the US dollar this morning after plunging 3% yesterday afternoon. When it came as news broke that Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan had been ordered to present himself to the Hawks tomorrow morning. Renewed rand weakness could put pressure on the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee, which meets next month to decide on interest rates. A weaker rand, of course, stokes inflation. Analysts commenting on the sharp drops today say the threat that Gordhan will no longer be able or perhaps willing to continue in his position is now real. The order to the Finance Minister is the latest development in a long-running dispute over the so-called SARS rogue unit formed during the Minister's previous role as Commissioner of the Revenue Service. Well, the rand has now gained somewhat, hovering around that 14 rand 10 cents to the US dollar mark. We take a look at the rand's performance since late last year, and of course, at this peak over here, very, very high. This is the episode with the former Finance Minister and Nene being dismissed. The rand then gaining somewhat, and of course, I would imagine the other peak there signifies what happened in the days of the Brexit vote, and we saw that emerging currencies losing some value against the US dollar. And of course, that leads us to where we are now at the moment in August, still trying to recover from what happened overnight and this morning. If we take a look to see whether or not this is really a domestic issue or it's due to rand strength, we'll have to measure it against the euro, and this is the poor performance of the dollar to the euro, seeing somewhat fairly stable compared to the previous graph we've seen. So that might give us some insight on where the real problem lies or causes for that rand weakness. But let's try and get more insight now. Nompu is still at the JSE, and she has more insight on where this rand is going. Nompu.
Thanks very much, Devin. Indeed, I have Owen Nkomo with me. He's from Investment Wealth, Nkunzi Wealth Management, pardon me. And he will be able to give us a little bit more insight since this is his bread and butter. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much, Nompu. Thanks for having me.
Okay, just give us an understanding of the mechanics of a rand depreciation. Why is it that events that are happening between the Hawks and the Finance Minister are now translating into a weaker rand?
Basically, what happens in the markets is that people trade things or buy and sell things based on sentiment. If we think there's good news, we're going to buy shares, we're going to buy the currency. And if we think there's bad news, we're going to do the opposite. So when you trade currencies, you're trading the rand and you're pairing it against the pound or the rand against the US dollar. So most of the times people trade the biggest trading pair, in our case, will be the rand and the dollar. So with this bad news that came through yesterday, which we consider bad news because Minister Gordhan is well revered across the world for being one of the best finance ministers and, you know, being on top of his game, etc. Now, all of a sudden, if he's being put into a position where he needs to report to court and stuff like that, then people read it as bad news. You know, we're not in any way saying that if he's done something wrong, he shouldn't go to court. But we're saying it's seen negatively. So for that reason, people are thinking there's still political issues in the country that still need to be sorted out. That's what the world is understanding this as. And for that reason, they are therefore thinking this is negative. And they're selling the rand. And they sold the rand, unfortunately, from 13.56 to 14.10, where it currently is sitting. And one is unfortunately saddened by the fact that, you know, the government and the responsible authorities don't stand up on time to say, yes, there's truth in this, and this is our reason for doing this. So there's uncertainty. And if there's one thing markets don't like, is uncertainty.
So based on what you say, and given the fact that now we're in a process where obviously Pravin Gordhan and others have to go and see the Hawks and there'll be processes involved, do we expect that we're going to continue seeing the rand on the back foot?
Now, look, I think the rand has surprised us in the past. It's continued to deal with bad news out there and it's strengthened over time. And I think you're looking at an environment where there's a continuation of the weakness of the pound, and in some instances the dollar has been weak as well. So we could probably, after a few days, if nothing major comes out tomorrow, we could see the currency strengthen back to 13.60. That's my view. I think that the rand still remains very weak, and even if something happens, I think it would have to result in Minister Gordhan being kicked out of his position for the rand to continue to weaken further from where it is. But look at it this way, Nompu. We recovered from the levels where the rand was when Minister Nene was fired. We got Minister Gordhan back. We went overseas to markets. We marketed South Africa Inc. The guy said, you know what, you guys are great. We'll give you a second chance. But what happens now? We're back to almost square one in terms of perceptions in the global markets.
Well, you bring me to my next question, really, which is if we continue to see the rand on the back foot going forward, the prognosis is for us to have almost negative growth and so on. Come December, what can we expect the ratings agencies to do?
Now, look, I really think that it'll be difficult to gauge because even this Minister Gordhan thing, even if it turns into a case, I don't believe we'll have got some kind of resolution by December. So it will still be a wait-and-see type of game. And in the meantime, I don't believe that the rand will continue to weaken. Yes, it may weaken. And if something negative happens sort of in the short term, if Minister Gordhan maybe gets recalled, then you can expect the currency to weaken further. But I think it's all quite ironic, Nombo, because we just come out of elections, which surprised many. And I was of the impression that, you know, behavioral patterns were going to change after these elections. We'll take things more seriously and urgently, you know, in terms of communicating at least, say, guys, we're doing this because of ABC. This is why we're calling the Minister Gordhan in on Thursday, if we are indeed calling him in. And then as soon as he's called in, after that process in court, if it happens, or in front of the Hawks, if the process happens, we do a conference call, you update the markets, you say, guys, this is what's going on, and this is the next step. And then we judge for ourselves how we can handle the investment market in the country. But then if there's silence and a vacuum of communication, it doesn't help us in the country at all.
All right, unfortunately, more questions, but not enough time. Thank you so much for your time. Well, that was Owen Ngoma. He's from Nkunzi Wealth. After the break, or maybe perhaps right now, we'll cross back to Devon.